I wonder if Dr. Van Dam can comment a bit on the care for the poor in the Old Testament and how that forms the background of the New Testament office of deacon.
And even who the poor are in the Old Testament.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a big question. But the poor, I guess, in the Old Testament, the description of the poor is painted with a very, very wide brush, which already says something to us. First of all, you have the materially poor who simply don't have money, they don't have the resources for day to day living. But then you also have the powerless, the ones who have become afflicted by loss of prosperity and loss of social status, so they feel kind of marginalized and sidelined. And then you have the afflicted, the oppressed, who've been intimidated by the rich or exploited by them. They're suffering from humiliation, contemptuous treatment. They are even mistreated judicially in the Old Testament. These are all people that are regarded as the poor and the afflicted. And you see that in the people who have no land, the widows, the orphans, um, people who are, in dire need. Now, interestingly, included in the Old Testament recipients of what we would call diaconal help are the immigrants, the sojourners,
Yeah.
who are in Israel but don't actually belong there in terms of ethnicity. But they have come into the land uh, initially from Egypt with the Exodus because it was a mixed multitude that came into that left Egypt and eventually entered Canaan. And God had laws for all those. Most translations speak of the sojourners. So there's a very, very wide uh, uh, net as to uh, who's all included in the category of the poor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how were they taken care of? Well, yeah, that's quite a the. I guess the first thing God taught his people was not to be materialistic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I got you out of Egypt. I've given you cities to live in. Now don't be stingy. You've
Right.
got to help your fellow Israelite, and that help starts on the family level. Um, it's especially the family that is in the front lines of having to help the needy. Uh, so, for example, if a family member needed money, he had to he was expected to receive interest free loans from family members who did have money. And when I'm speaking of family, it's the extended family.
Yeah.
It's a structure. So you have the nuclear family, but you also have, the uncles, the aunts, the in-laws, and so on. And so they are all responsible in some way or other through all the legislation that God gave to care for the indigent, for the poor. Um, and of course, if someone became really poor in the family, then they had to be helped by serving their relatives as a servant, but not, God stressed, as a slave.
Mm-hmm.
So they would be day laborers. Yeah. Now, whatever this family couldn't pick up on, it could happen, for example, that a family member traveled to another part of the country where there wasn't the family net support. Well, then society would have to take care of them, and God gave all kinds of laws to make sure that the poor were looked after by society at large. So everyone in Israel had to be careful to preserve the dignity of the poor by um, loaning the money, by not going after their pledges, by allowing them to go into the fields and pick fruit that and so on that they could eat during the harvest. They could glean. Uh, they had the right to participate in feasts and festivals and to have a good square meal every so often. So they were provided for by society as a whole as well. And should society fail, well, the government, the state, the king had to make sure justice was upheld. So that was the last court of appeal, so to speak.